So here's a specific story that relates to the general pattern I just told you about. The specific story is about heart-lung machines. Basically, in the 30s, 1930s, children were getting rheumatic fever, and one of the side effects of rheumatic fever can be damage to the heart valve. And basically, sometimes the damage is scarring. Sometimes the damage can be fixed. You know, you cut open the flaps and so on so they continue to function. But sometimes the damage is so severe that you really have to replace the heart valve somehow, and you can't do that on a beating heart. So what do? Well, at that time, there was nothing to do because there was no heart-lung machine. There was no way to sustain the patient while they were installing a valve. And so doctors in those periods were coping, and children were dying on their operating tables. And the story goes that a particular young patient died on John Hashem Gibbon's operating table, and he had had enough. And so he said, we have to devise a heart-lung machine. And he went to producers, and he said to the producers, look, we've got to have a heart-lung machine. And they said, well, you need techniques with a heart-lung machine. You know, you need to be able to actually replace valves. Can you do that? Well, I need a heart-lung machine in order to do that. Well, so you haven't developed these techniques yet? No. How do we know you can? Well, I'm really good at vascular surgery. Yeah, but how do you know? And do you know other people will pick up that technique, and so on and so forth? Now, at the end of these meetings, and he had quite a few on this vein, they would withdraw the tea and cookies that they'd offered him and say, in effect, come back when you've got a heart-lung machine. Now, this is absolutely opposite of the conventional wisdom that the producers are pioneering. So they said, go away. He went away. What you see over here is that 20 years later, he worked with charitable donations and so on from IBM, among others. And 20 years later, he, who was not an engineer, had built the first functioning heart-lung machine. And then what happened? Well, what happened was this pattern that I explained to you before. What happened was he was successful, right? And saved some patients, and other surgeons heard of it, and therefore they came to observe what he was doing. And they then said, well, I'm going to send my technician to make a copy. And he said, fine. One of the things that users generally do is share rather than sort of restrict others. We'll get to that. And then what happened was somebody said, you know, silly, each technician making a machine from scratch. Why doesn't somebody start a little company so that we can get this stuff made in a more efficient way? And the thing began to take off, and then some number of years later, big medical firms started to come in, right? So notice what's going on here. Two things. One is the innovation at the start, where everything has to start small, at the start of things. It's the users who innovate, and what happens is the users are also providing to the producers signals as to what's good. The producer, I mean, I had a company years ago, and it made fax machines. You probably don't know what a fax machine is anymore, but it made fax machines. And I had people, I ran engineering there, and I had people coming in trying to give me ideas. And they would come in and they would say, well, this is a really good idea. I remember particularly because it was so crazy, some person came in and said, I've invented a rubber bowling pin, which I thought did not have a close relationship to the fax market. And I said, well, yeah. And he said, well, there's going to be a shortage of hardwood, and then they'll have to make the pins out of rubber, and I've got the first one, and you should manufacture. Well, anyway, so the point is that a lot of people come to producers, and say they want this or that, or you should really make this or that or the other thing. The producer often doesn't know, nor can the producer really figure it out without a huge amount of effort. So it's not so stupid that the producer is sitting there saying, I'm not getting involved till something happens. I'm not criticizing producers, I'm just saying that the conventional paradigm isn't what it should be. And so what you see here is that users are not only innovating, but they're basically acting like a filtration system by the imitation that they do to separate the wheat from the chaff. Okay? So they're doing both those things, and then the producers are doing what they do, which is picking up the successes. Now, what we really have then is two innovation paradigms that are active in the economy. The traditional one, which people have sort of talked about and which policy is organized around, is the one on the bottom. That is the one that says, this is called the linear innovation model. Sometimes it has market research at the beginning, sometimes it has R&D at the beginning. And what happens is that supposedly markets or R&D advances drive a producer to decide there's an opportunity. Then what the producer does is develop something. Then what he does is produce it. Then what he does is sell it. That's the paradigm. Now, the thing that has been invisible, and I will show you that basically because people thought that the only people who were active in this system were producers, the thing that's been invisible in the economy is this parallel user innovation paradigm. And it's sort of fascinating. Basically, you'll see it seems to be, in terms of activity, pretty much as large or larger as the producer one. But what it involves is that story I told you. Users innovate, they collaboratively evaluate, replicate, and improve. Think about Linux, for example. And then they diffuse peer-to-peer for free. So that was the story you saw in the case of John Hashem Gibbon, right? He innovated, other people began to pick it up and improve it and so on and copy it. And it was peer-to-peer diffusion. It was not marketplace diffusion, it was given away. Okay? Now, that red arrow there is kind of interesting. Because what happened there with the red arrow was that at a certain point, as you saw, producers began to make the heart-lung machine. So in other words, it shifted when they saw there was sufficient demand from the user innovation paradigm to the producer innovation paradigm, and users started to buy the machines from a fabricator because of economies of scale. They could get it cheaper and so on and so forth, instead of buying it from or making it themselves from the user thing. But here's a critical point. The whole system of heart operations also involves techniques. How do you do it? The machine is no good, which was the point about the companies in the beginning, without the techniques. And the techniques still diffuse by the top arrow. The techniques are surgeon-to-surgeon teaching for free. So what you've got when you focus on this arrow is you've got, first of all, only part of the innovation activity, and you've got something that is, in a sense, codependent, parasitical, complementary to things that have to travel through the upper system for the things you sell in the bottom system to make any sense. So another example that's very consumer-oriented, a skateboard is sold, right? Users develop skateboards, same story. Users developed them, they shared them, other people picked them up, they all made them at home. Eventually manufacturers come in. But a skateboard is nothing without the techniques that you do with it. And those techniques still diffuse peer-to-peer. You'll see kids around, they're showing each other. You don't have the University of Skateboarding, although that might be a really good idea. Wouldn't that be cool? All right. So that's the general principles.